The relentless summer sun beat down on Alyssa Turner's slumped shoulders as she trudged through the dusty street of Mojave, Nevada. A small town once bustling with life now reduced to a parched skeleton of its former self, with every eye following her movements like she was death itself walking among them. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, avoiding the hateful stares that had become as familiar as the persistent thirst that plagued everyone. 342 days without rain. Alyssa had been counting. The townsfolk had been counting too, but they'd also been looking for someone to blame. Water witch, a voice hissed as she passed. Alyssa quickened her pace. The general store was just ahead, and she needed supplies if Mr. Hoffman would even sell to her anymore. Her hand instinctively touched the pendant around her neck, a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. The turquoise stone, set in tarnished silver, had become a symbol of suspicion for the town. Strange markings were etched into its surface, markings nobody understood. That was enough for most folks. Mrs. Turner, Mr. Hoffman acknowledged stiffly as the bell above the door announced her arrival. The once friendly shopkeeper now regarded her with thinly veiled contempt. "Just some flour and coffee, please," Alyssa said softly. "And whatever vegetables you might have left," Hoffman snorted. "Vegetables? Lady, nothing's growing for 50 miles in any direction. Ain't you noticed?" The handful of other customers in the store had gone quiet, watching the exchange. "I'll take whatever you have then," she replied, placing coins on the counter. Money she couldn't afford to spend, but her pantry was empty and she had no choice. Hoffman gathered her items with deliberate slowness. "Funny how your little garden out at your place still has green in it. Only patch of land not turned to dust for miles." Alyssa stiffened. Her small garden, protected in the shadow of the rocky outcropping near her cabin, had indeed managed to survive better than most. She'd spent hours hauling water from the dwindling creek to keep it alive. "I work hard at it," she said simply. A man spat on the floor. "Work hard at what? Cursing the rest of us while you keep the rain for yourself." "That's enough, Pearson," Hoffman said, though his tone lacked conviction. Alyssa gathered her meager supplies and backed toward the door. Ever since her husband Thomas had died in the mine collapse 2 years ago, the town's attitude toward her had shifted. She was different, kept to herself, lived outside town, knew too much about plants. When the drought came, it hadn't taken long for whispers to become accusations. The walk back to her cabin on the outskirts of town was longer than usual, the weight of hatred heavier than her supplies. As she rounded the bend in the road, she spotted a group of men gathered in front of her home. Her heart thundered in her chest. Mayor Willard stood at the front, his round face flushed red with the heat and something else, a righteous anger that made Alyssa's blood run cold. "There she is," someone called out. The men turned and Alyssa froze. There were at least a dozen of them, including Sheriff Dawson, whose hand rested ominously on his holster. "Afternoon, Mrs. Turner," Mayor Willard said, his voice carrying across the yard. "We've come to have a word with you about this drought situation." Alyssa swallowed hard. "I don't know anything about the drought except that we're all suffering from it." "Are we all suffering?" Sheriff Dawson asked, his eyes narrowing. "Your garden seems to be doing just fine. Folks are saying you've been taking the rain for yourself with those witchy ways of yours." "That's absurd," Alyssa replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I haul water from the creek every day, the same creek that's run dry everywhere else." One of the men challenged. Mayor Willard stepped forward. "Mrs. Turner, people are desperate, cattle are dying. Children are getting sick from the dust. We need answers." "And you think I have them?" she asked incredulously. "We think you're causing this," Willard stated bluntly. "That pendant of yours, everyone knows it's not natural. And you were seen out in the hills during the new moon, doing God knows what kind of rituals." Alyssa's hand flew to her necklace. She had been gathering herbs that night, hoping to make medicine for old Mrs. Peterson's cough. "This is madness," she whispered. "You can't possibly believe I could cause a drought." But looking at their faces, she realized they did believe it. Fear had twisted their minds and they needed someone to blame. "We're giving you one chance," the sheriff said. "Break whatever curse you've put on this town or we'll be forced to take action." "What kind of action?" Alyssa asked, her voice barely audible. Mayor Willard adjusted his hat. "The town council is meeting tonight. We'll decide then. In the meantime, I suggest you start praying for rain, Mrs." Turner, for your sake. The men dispersed, leaving Alyssa standing alone with her parcels clutched to her chest. She rushed inside, bolting the door behind her, and finally allowed the tears to fall. They were going to drive her out or worse. The thought of what worse might entail made her hands shake as she put away her supplies. Through the window, she caught sight of a rider approaching from the north, a stranger on a chestnut horse, moving at an easy pace. Visitors were rare these days. Most travelers avoided Mojave, knowing there was little water to be had. Alyssa watched as the man dismounted at the edge of her property. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. His hat was pulled low, shading his face, but she could tell he was younger than most of the men in town, perhaps early 30s. He approached her door with confidence, as if he had every right to be there. Alyssa hesitated, then opened the door before he could knock. "Can I help you?" she asked, one hand still on the door, ready to slam it shut if needed. The man removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, but handsome in a rugged way. "Name's Yates," he said. "Yancy Yates. I'm looking for work and a place to water my horse." Alyssa regarded him suspiciously. "You've come to the wrong place for both, Mr. Yates. Mojave's dying of thirst, and there's no work to be had." He glanced over his shoulder at her garden, his eyebrow raising slightly. "Seems to me you've got water enough for plants. My horse doesn't ask for much." "That garden's keeping me alive," she said defensively, "and it's already made me enough enemies." Yancy's expression shifted, his eyes scanning the property with newfound alertness. "Enemies?" Alyssa hesitated. Telling a stranger about her troubles seemed foolish, but something about his direct gaze made her want to trust him. "The town blames me for the drought," she said finally. "They were just here threatening me. They think I'm causing it somehow." To her surprise, Yancy didn't laugh or dismiss her words. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen this before. People get desperate in hard times. They look for someone different to blame." "Different," Alyssa repeated bitterly. "That's one way to put it." Yancy studied her for a moment. "I can't offer much, but I'm handy with tools and good with horses. I could help around your place in exchange for just enough water for my horse and myself." "Why would you want to help someone the town's ready to run out on a rail?" she asked. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "Maybe because I've been run out of a few places myself." Against her better judgment, Alyssa found herself stepping back from the door. "There's a pump out back. It still draws water, but it's getting lower every week. You can water your horse, and I've got stew on the stove if you're hungry." "Much obliged, madam," Yancy said, replacing his hat and tipping it slightly before leading his horse around the back. Alyssa closed the door, wondering if she just made a terrible mistake or found an unexpected ally. Either way, with the town meeting happening tonight, she suspected things were about to get worse before they got better, if they got better at all. The stew simmered on the stove, filling the small cabin with the aroma of rabbit and what few root vegetables Alyssa had managed to coax from her garden. She set 2 bowls on the rough-hewn table, wondering why she'd invited a complete stranger into her home when the rest of the town was ready to brand her a witch. Yancy returned from tending to his horse, ducking his head slightly to enter through the low doorway. He removed his hat and gloves, setting them aside with the respectful air of a man who'd been taught proper manners. "That smells mighty fine, Mrs. Turner," he said, taking the seat she gestured to. "Miss Turner now," she corrected automatically. "My husband passed 2 years ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," she nodded, ladling stew into both bowls. "Mining accident, took 6 men that day." "I worked the silver mines in Colorado for a spell," Yancy said. "Dangerous work." "What brings you to Mojave?" Alyssa asked, sitting across from him. "Most folks are leaving, not arriving." Yancy took a spoonful of stew, savoring it before answering. "I go where work takes me. Heard there might be opportunities with the railway expansion." "Not much happening with that now," she said. "Everything's stalled with the drought. No water for the workers, and the ground's too hard to lay track properly." They ate in silence for a few moments, Alyssa studying her guest when he wasn't looking. His clothes were worn but clean, his gun belt well-maintained but not flashy. He had the calloused hands of a working man, not a gunslinger. "You mentioned you've seen this before," she said finally. "People blaming someone for their troubles." Yancy set down his spoon. I was in Arizona 4 years back. Small town like this one got hit with fever. Started blaming a Mexican family on the edge of town, said they'd brought the sickness with them. Town nearly burned their place to the ground. What happened? A few of us stood up, made it clear that wasn't going to happen, he said simply. The fever passed eventually, as fevers do. Alyssa's fingers found her pendant again, tracing the unfamiliar symbols. And droughts, do they just pass too? Everything passes, Miss Turner. Question is what happens in the meantime. A knock at the door interrupted them, sharp and urgent. Alyssa tensed, and Yancy's hand moved instinctively toward his holster. You expecting company? He asked quietly. She shook her head, rising slowly. Through the window, she recognized Dr. Morrison's buggy. The elderly physician was one of the few in town who still treated her with some measure of kindness. It's the doctor, she said, relaxing slightly as she went to open the door. Dr. Morrison's normally calm face was creased with worry. Alyssa, I came as soon as I could. The town meeting, he stopped abruptly upon seeing Yancy at the table. It's all right, Alyssa assured him. Mr. Yates is just passing through. What about the meeting? Dr. Morrison removed his spectacles, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They've moved it up. It's happening now, and I don't like the mood, my dear. Willard's got everyone riled up. They're talking about forcing you to leave town tonight. Tonight, Alyssa's voice faltered. But I haven't done anything. They need a scapegoat, the doctor said wearily. And you're different. That's enough for them. Yancy stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. What exactly are they planning to do? Dr. Morrison eyed him uncertainly. Who might you be, sir? Someone who doesn't much care for mobs, Yancy replied. The doctor hesitated, then continued. They're planning to come out here after the meeting, a group of them. They'll give you a choice: leave willingly or be forcibly removed. And if I refuse? Alyssa asked. Dr. Morrison's silence was answer enough. Yancy moved to the window, peering out at the landscape. How long do we have? An hour, maybe less, the doctor said. Alyssa, you should pack what you can carry and go. I can take you in my buggy as far as the next town. Alyssa felt her world collapsing. Leave. This land was all she had left. Her home, her husband's grave on the hill behind the cabin, her memories, everything was here. I can't just abandon my home, she said. You can't fight the whole town either, Dr. Morrison argued gently. Yancy turned from the window. Maybe she won't have to. Both Alyssa and the doctor looked at him questioningly. What do you mean? Alyssa asked. Sometimes all it takes is one person standing in the way to make a mob think twice, Yancy said. Doctor, how many men are likely to come out here? 8, maybe 10, Dr. Morrison estimated. Led by Sheriff Dawson and Mayor Willard. Armed, the sheriff certainly, perhaps a few others. Yancy nodded as if coming to a decision. You should go back to town, doctor. Tell them you came out to warn Miss Turner, found her packing to leave, but she needs until morning. And what will you be doing? Dr. Morrison asked skeptically. Making sure nobody does anything foolish tonight, Yancy replied, his voice calm but resolute. Alyssa stepped forward. I can't ask you to put yourself at risk for me. You don't even know me. I know enough, Yancy said, his blue eyes meeting hers. I know what's right and what's wrong. Running innocent people out of their homes is wrong. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. This is very noble, Mr. Yates, but I fear you're underestimating the situation. These are desperate men. So am I in my way, Yancy replied with a hint of a smile. Doctor, please go back and buy us some time. Miss Turner and I will handle things from here. After the doctor reluctantly departed, Alyssa turned to Yancy. You're being foolish. You should go too. This isn't your fight. I choose my own fights, he said, checking his revolver methodically, and I've never been one to leave a lady in distress. They could kill you, she said bluntly. They could try, he replied, with a confidence that wasn't boastful, merely factual. Now tell me about your property. Any approaches besides the main road? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parched landscape, Alyssa found herself explaining the layout of her land to this stranger who had inexplicably decided to stand between her and a town's worth of hatred. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified, perhaps both were appropriate. What she couldn't explain was the flutter in her chest when Yancy's hand briefly touched hers as they prepared for what was coming. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with kindness, let alone been willing to risk themselves for her. The feeling was as unexpected as rain in this endless drought. The distant sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of the town delegation sooner than expected. Alyssa's heart raced as she peered through the window. A group of riders approached, kicking up dust in the fading light. She counted 8 men, including Sheriff Dawson and Mayor Willard at the front. "They're here," she whispered. Yancy stood beside the door, his expression unreadable. "Stay inside, let me talk to them first." "But trust me," he said, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "I've handled worse than a few angry townsfolk." Before she could argue further, he stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Alyssa moved to the window, watching as Yancy walked casually toward the approaching riders, his stance relaxed but alert. The riders slowed, clearly surprised to encounter someone they weren't expecting. Sheriff Dawson's hand moved to rest on his holster as they came to a stop several yards from where Yancy stood. "Evening, gentlemen," Yancy called out. "Something I can help you with?" Mayor Willard leaned forward in his saddle. "Who are you, stranger?" "Name's Yancy Yates." "I'm a friend of Miss Turner's." The men exchanged glances. Sheriff Dawson spat on the ground. Didn't know the witch had friends. Yancy's posture remained casual, but Alyssa noticed how his right hand hung loose, never far from his gun. "I'd appreciate if you'd mind your language when referring to the lady. Now, what business brings you out here this evening?" "Our business is with Alyssa Turner," Mayor Willard said. "Not with you." "Well, as it happens, I've made her business my business," Yancy replied. "And I understand you gentlemen are planning something that sounds an awful lot like running someone off their rightful property." "This ain't your concern, stranger," one of the other men called out. "The woman's brought drought on this town. We're dying out here. Is that right?" Yancy asked. "One woman causing a drought across Nevada, that's quite a feat." Sheriff Dawson dismounted, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dust. "Listen here, Yates, we don't know you, and frankly we don't care to. Step aside and let us handle our town business." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Sheriff," Yancy said calmly. "Miss Turner hasn't broken any laws that I'm aware of. You have no right to drive her from her home." "We have every right." Mayor Willard's face was flushed with anger. "Look around you, nothing but dust for miles, cattle dying. Crops failed, and yet her garden grows. You explain that?" "Hard work and good fortune," Yancy suggested. "Neither of which are crimes." Sheriff Dawson took another step forward. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step aside." Inside the cabin, Alyssa held her breath. She could see the tension in the air, practically taste it. These men had come with purpose, fueled by fear and desperation. They wouldn't be turned away easily. "And I'm going to decline one more time," Yancy said, his voice still even but carrying an unmistakable steel beneath the politeness. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun, and Alyssa nearly cried out. But Yancy was faster, much faster. Before Dawson could clear leather, Yancy's revolver was out and pointed steadily at the sheriff's chest. "I wouldn't," Yancy advised quietly. The other men stiffened, some reaching for their own weapons, but hesitating when they saw how casually Yancy had outdrawn their sheriff. "Now," Yancy continued, "I understand you're all suffering. The droughts hit everyone hard, but blaming an innocent woman won't bring rain. It'll just add another sin to your ledger. You can't stand against all of us," one of the men growled. "I can put 2 bullets in the sheriff and the mayor before any of you clear your holsters," Yancy stated matter-of-factly. "After that, well, it gets messy for everyone." "Is that really how you want this to go?" A tense silence fell over the yard. Alyssa could see the calculations happening behind each man's eyes, weighing their anger against the very real threat Yancy presented. Mayor Willard finally broke the silence. "We just want her gone." "The drought started when she started wearing that heathen necklace of hers. It ain't natural. Superstition," Yancy replied. "Next you'll be saying black cats and broken mirrors caused your wells to dry up." "You weren't here," Sheriff Dawson said through gritted teeth. "You don't know." "I know enough about droughts and enough about fear to recognize when one's causing the other," Yancy said. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You gentlemen are going to get back on your horses and ride into town. Tomorrow, when heads are cooler, we can discuss this civilly." "And if we refuse?" Mayor Willard challenged. Yancy's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Then I'll be forced to demonstrate just how serious I am about protecting Miss Turner's right to live peacefully on her own land." The standoff stretched on for what seemed like an eternity to Alyssa. She could see sweat beading on the mayor's forehead, could sense the indecision rippling through the group of men. Finally, Sheriff Dawson took a step backward. "This isn't over," he said. "For tonight it is," Yancy replied. Reluctantly, the sheriff remounted his horse. "We'll be back tomorrow with more men." "I'll still be here," Yancy assured him. The riders turned their horses, casting dark glances back at the cabin as they departed. Alyssa waited until they were well down the road before rushing outside. "That was the most foolhardy thing I've ever witnessed," she said, her voice shaking. "They could have killed you." Yancy holstered his gun with practiced ease. "They could have tried," he repeated his earlier sentiment. "But most men value their lives more than their principles, especially when those principles are built on fear rather than fact." "They'll be back," Alyssa said, watching the dust cloud fade in the distance. "Yes, they will," Yancy agreed, "but we've bought ourselves some time." Alyssa looked at him, really looked at him. In the fading light, with the setting sun gilding his features, he seemed almost heroic, like a character from one of the dime novels Thomas used to read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't know me." "You could have ridden on, found water elsewhere." Yancy's eyes met hers, and for a moment his carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because I've spent too much of my life riding on when I should have stayed to fight." Alyssa didn't know what battles he'd walked away from, what ghosts haunted him, but in that moment, she was profoundly grateful that this time he'd chosen to stay. "Come inside," she said, touching his arm lightly. "We need to plan for tomorrow." As they walked back to the cabin together, Alyssa realized that for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone, and that, in its way, felt as miraculous as rain. Inside the cabin, Alyssa lit the oil lamps as darkness settled over the land. The warm glow made the small space feel almost cozy, despite the tension that lingered in the air. Yancy stood by the window, watching the road, his profile outlined against the night. "You should consider leaving," he said without turning. "Just until things calm down." Alyssa shook her head, though he couldn't see it. "This is my home, the only thing I have left of Thomas. I won't be driven from it by fear and superstition." Yancy turned to face her, his expression serious. "They believe you're responsible for the drought. That kind of belief doesn't die easily." "And you?" she asked. "What do you believe?" "I believe in natural causes," he replied. "Droughts come and go, always have, nothing supernatural about it." Alyssa's fingers found her pendant again, a habit she'd developed since the whispers began. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died, said it would protect me." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Some protection." Yancy moved closer, studying the turquoise stone. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. He gently lifted the pendant from where it rested against her collarbone, his fingers brushing her skin with unexpected warmth. Alyssa felt her breath catch at the contact. "These markings," he said, examining the etchings, "they're Navajo protection symbols." Surprised, she looked up at him. "How do you know that?" "Spent some time with the Navajo when I was younger," he explained. "My father was a trader. We traveled through their territory often." "The town thinks they're witchcraft symbols," Alyssa said. Yancy released the pendant, his hand lingering near hers for a moment longer than necessary. "People fear what they don't understand, and fear makes them dangerous." "Is that why you carry a gun?" she asked. A shadow passed over his face. "I carry a gun because the world is full of men who only understand one language." He moved back to the window. "You should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will come early." "And you?" Alyssa asked. "I'll keep watch," he said simply. She wanted to argue, to insist he needed rest too, but the determination in his stance told her it would be futile. Instead, she gathered some blankets. "Take these at least," she said, placing them on the small sofa, "if you change your mind." Their hands brushed again as he accepted the blankets, and this time his fingers curled briefly around hers. "Thank you, Miss Turner." "Alyssa," she corrected softly. "If you're going to face down a town for me, you might as well use my given name." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Alyssa, then. Good night." Sleep came fitfully for Alyssa, her dreams filled with angry faces and drought-scorched land. She woke just before dawn to find Yancy still at his post by the window, his revolver resting on the sill beside him. "Any visitors?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Just coyotes," he replied. and they had the good sense to keep their distance. Alyssa set about making coffee, the morning routine bringing a small sense of normalcy to the extraordinary circumstances. "What's your plan?" she asked as she handed him a steaming cup. Yancy accepted it gratefully. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're facing. I'd like to ride into town, get a feel for the mood." "That's too dangerous," Alyssa protested. "They'll know you're with me." "That's counting on them recognizing a stranger in town," he said. "Most of those men were too focused on you to really look at me. With my hat pulled low, I should be able to move around unnoticed for a while." Before Alyssa could argue further, a distant sound caught their attention. She moved to the window, peering out beside Yancy. A single rider was approaching, kicking up dust in the morning light. "Trouble?" she asked. Yancy squinted. "No, it's the doctor, doctor." Morrison arrived looking even more harried than the day before, his normally neat appearance rumpled as if he'd slept in his clothes. "I came as soon as I could," he said as Alyssa welcomed him inside. "They're planning something, Alyssa, something worse than just running you out of town." Yancy straightened. "What kind of something?" The doctor removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. "There was another meeting late last night after they returned from here. Willard's convinced them that more extreme measures are needed. They're talking about a witch trial, Alyssa." "A witch trial?" she repeated incredulously. "This is 1878, not 1692. Fear doesn't respect centuries," Dr. Morrison said wearily. "They're planning to come for you this afternoon, take you back to town by force." Yancy's expression darkened. "How many?" 20 men at least, the doctor said. "Armed, Willard's deputized half the town." Alyssa sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "This is madness." "It's desperation," Dr. Morrison corrected. "The situation in town is worse than ever. The last well is producing barely enough water for drinking. Livestock are dying by the dozens. 2 children have fallen ill from the dust." Yancy paced the small confines of the cabin, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "We need to change tactics," he said finally. "Standing our ground won't work against those numbers." "I've already arranged passage for you on the afternoon stage," Dr. Morrison told Alyssa. "It's not ideal, but no," she interrupted firmly. "I told you before I won't be driven from my home." "They'll kill you, Alyssa," the doctor said bluntly. "Or worse, they'll make a spectacle of you first, then kill you." "There has to be another way," she insisted, looking to Yancy. He stopped pacing, his gaze meeting hers. "Maybe there is. Doctor, how far gone is the reason of these people? Could evidence still sway them, doctor?" Morrison considered the question. "Some perhaps. Dawson's a hothead and Willard's too invested in his position of authority to back down easily, but others, they're just scared, not evil." "What kind of evidence?" Alyssa asked. Yancy's expression was thoughtful. "The drought. If we could prove it's a natural occurrence, not some curse." "How?" Dr. Morrison asked. "We can hardly make it rain." "No," Yancy agreed, "but we might be able to find water." Alyssa and Dr. Morrison exchanged confused glances. "I've spent years traveling through desert country," Yancy explained. "I've learned to read the land to find water where others can't see it. There are signs certain plants, rock formations, the way the ground lies." "You think there's undiscovered water near Mojave?" Alyssa asked. "It's possible," he said. "The creek that runs by your property, it dwindles but never completely dries up. That water has to come from somewhere." Hope flickered in Alyssa's chest for the first time in months. "If we could find water, it would undermine their argument that you're causing the drought," Yancy finished. "At the very least, it would give the reasonable people in town something else to focus on." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "It could work. Water would be more compelling than superstition, especially now." "I need to follow the creek bed up into the hills," Yancy said. "See if I can locate the source." "I'm coming with you," Alyssa said, rising from her chair. "It's not safe," Yancy protested. "If they come while we're gone, I know these hills better than you do," she pointed out. "I've lived here for years, and if they come, I'd rather not be sitting here waiting for them." Yancy looked as if he wanted to argue further, but something in her expression must have convinced him. He nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we move fast and stay alert." Dr. Morrison stood as well. "I'll return to town, try to slow things down, buy you as much time as I can." As the doctor departed, Alyssa quickly gathered supplies, canteens, some food, a small shovel. Yancy checked his revolver and refilled his ammunition. "Ready?" he asked as she emerged from the bedroom, dressed in practical riding clothes. "Ready," Alyssa confirmed, though her heart pounded with both fear and an unexpected excitement. They set out on foot, following the narrow creek that wound its way through Alyssa's property and up into the rocky hills beyond. The sun climbed higher, baking the already parched land. Alyssa was acutely aware of time passing, knowing that with each hour the threat from town grew closer. "Your husband," Yancy said as they navigated a particularly steep section. "Thomas, what was he like?" The question surprised her. Few people asked about Thomas anymore. His memory had faded from the town's consciousness as quickly as his body had been buried. "Kind," she replied after a moment. "Hardworking, not much for words, but when he spoke, people listened." She smiled at a memory. "He could make anything grow, had a way with plants that seemed almost magical. That's where I learned about gardening." "You loved him," Yancy observed. "Very much," Alyssa said softly. "We were young when we married. I was 18. He was 22. We had 6 good years together before the mine collapse." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the occasional scuffle of boots on rocky ground and the faint trickle of the diminishing creek. "What about you?" Alyssa asked eventually. "You mentioned traveling with your father. Is he still alive?" Yancy shook his head. "Died of fever when I was 16. Mother passed when I was just a boy. Been on my own since." "No wife, family?" she asked, then regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "No need for apologies," he assured her. "And no wife. The life I've led doesn't lend itself to settling down." Alyssa wanted to ask more what kind of life he'd led, what he'd seen in his travels, why he'd chosen to involve himself in her troubles, but they had reached a point where the creek bed narrowed between 2 rocky outcroppings. Yancy knelt, examining the ground. "The water's stronger here," he observed. "See how the rocks are darker, more moisture." Alyssa nodded, watching as he traced the flow with experienced eyes. "We need to follow it up," he said. "The source can't be far." The terrain grew more challenging as they climbed higher into the hills. The creek, rather than diminishing as Alyssa had expected, seemed to gain strength, the trickle becoming a steady flow. "This doesn't make sense," she said, pausing to catch her breath. "If the water's getting stronger, why is the town still in drought?" Yancy frowned, surveying the landscape. "Something must be redirecting it or blocking it further downstream." They pressed on, the sun directly overhead now, beating down mercilessly. Alyssa's throat was parched despite the water they'd brought, and she could feel sweat soaking through her clothes. "There," Yancy said suddenly, pointing ahead. "See that rock formation?" Alyssa squinted against the glare. A large outcropping of rock jutted from the hillside, its surface gleaming with moisture. As they approached, she could hear the distinct sound of water flowing. "It's a spring," she realized. A natural spring. They rushed forward, and sure enough, water bubbled from a crevice in the rock face, forming a small pool before flowing down to become the creek they had been following. "This is it," Yancy said, his face alight with discovery. "This is the source." Alyssa knelt by the pool, dipping her fingers into the cool, clear water. "But if this spring is still flowing, why isn't the water reaching town?" Yancy was already moving downstream, his eyes scanning the creek bed with intense focus. He stopped about 50 yards below the spring where the creek disappeared between large boulders. "Here," he called. "Come look at this." Alyssa hurried to join him. The creek flowed into a narrow passage between the rocks, but instead of emerging on the other side, it seemed to vanish. "It's going underground," Yancy explained, getting down on his knees to peer into the gap. "There must be a cave or tunnel system beneath." "So the water is still flowing, just not where people can access it," Alyssa said, understanding dawning. "The drought didn't stop the spring, it just changed the course of the water." Yancy nodded, excitement in his eyes. "And if we can find where it emerges again or create a new channel, we could bring water back to Mojave," Alyssa finished, her own excitement building. They spent the next hour examining the area, tracing the likely path of the underground flow. Yancy's experience proved invaluable as he identified subtle signs in the landscape, a patch of unusually green vegetation, a depression in the earth, the way certain rocks had been worn smooth. "I think it surfaces again about half a mile downstream," he said finally, "but something's blocking the main outlet, forcing most of the water to stay underground." "Can we clear it?" Alyssa asked. Yancy glanced at the sky, measuring the sun's position. Not alone and not quickly. We'd need help, tools. Help from the very people who want to drive me out, Alyssa said grimly, or hang you, Yancy added bluntly. But water changes priorities mighty fast in drought country. They shared a look, both understanding the gamble they were considering. If they returned to town with news of the spring but no immediate proof, they might not be believed, or worse, the town might decide Alyssa had been hiding the water deliberately. We need to bring someone here, Alyssa decided. Someone they'll trust, Doctor Morrison maybe, and one or two others who still have their wits about them. Yancy nodded. I'll go back, find the doctor. You should stay here, continue mapping the water's path. No, she said firmly. We stick together. I'm not letting you face that mob alone again. He looked as if he wanted to argue but seemed to recognize the determination in her eyes. All right, together then, but we move fast. They made their way back down the hillside at a brisk pace, Alyssa's mind racing with possibilities. If they could restore water to Mojave, perhaps the town's hatred would dissipate. Perhaps she could reclaim her place in the community, no longer viewed as an outsider to be feared. And perhaps, a small voice whispered in her mind, Yancy Yates might find reason to stay rather than continue his wandering life. The thought startled her. She barely knew this man, yet in the span of a day, he had become something essential, not just a protector, but a companion, someone who saw her clearly when the rest of the world had chosen to see only their fears reflected back at them. As they approached her cabin, Alyssa's momentary hope shattered. A large group of riders was already gathered in front of her home, at least 20 men, as Dr. Morrison had warned. Mayor Willard's voice carried on the still air, issuing orders to search the property. Yancy pulled her behind a large boulder out of sight of the gathering. Too late, he muttered, his expression grim. What do we do? Alyssa whispered, panic rising in her throat. He peered around the rock, assessing the situation. They don't know about the spring yet, that's our advantage. They're going to burn my home, she said, watching as several men carried torches despite the bright afternoon sun. Yancy's jaw tightened. Not if I can help it. He turned to her, his blue eyes intense. Listen carefully, I'm going to create a diversion. When I do, I want you to circle around to the west, get to Dr. Morrison's house. He'll hide you until I can return. Return from where? What are you planning? I'm going to convince them to follow me to the spring, he said. Alyssa grabbed his arm. That's madness, they're out for blood. They won't listen. They will if I give them no choice, Yancy replied, his hand moving to his holster. Water is more powerful than hate, Alyssa. I just need to make them see that. Before she could protest further, he was moving, slipping from boulder to boulder until he had a clear line to her cabin. Then, to her horror, he stood and walked openly toward the gathered mob. Afternoon, gentlemen, his voice rang out clear and confident. Looking for something. The men whirled, many drawing weapons. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward, his gun already aimed at Yancy's chest. Where is she? He demanded. Safe, Yancy replied. Which is more than I can say for any of you if those torches touch Miss Turner's property. Mayor Willard pushed his way to the front of the group. You're outnumbered, Yates. This doesn't have to get ugly. Just tell us where the witch is hiding. Alyssa held her breath, watching from her concealment as Yancy faced down 20 armed men without so much as a flinch. I have a better offer, Yancy said, his voice carrying easily to her hiding place. How about instead of chasing innocent women, I show you where to find water, enough water for the whole town? A murmur ran through the crowd. Doubt flickered across Mayor Willard's face, but Sheriff Dawson remained unmoved. More tricks, the sheriff spat. There's no water to be found, we've searched for months. Not everywhere, Yancy countered, and not with the right eyes. I've found a spring in the hills, active, flowing. The water's been going underground, but it can be redirected back to town. Several of the men exchanged glances, hope warring with suspicion on their faces. And why should we believe you? Mayor Willard demanded. Because I can take you there, Yancy said. Right now. You can see it with your own eyes. It's a trap, Sheriff Dawson insisted. He's trying to lead us away so the witch can escape. Yancy's patience visibly thinned. Listen to yourselves. You're so fixated on blaming someone that you're ignoring a real solution staring you in the face. What matters more, finding a scapegoat or saving your town? His words hung in the air, and Alyssa could see they were having an effect on some of the men. A few lowered their weapons slightly, uncertainty replacing the righteous anger that had driven them here. "I say we hear him out," one of the older men said. Alyssa recognized him as Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper. "What harm can it do to look? It could be a wild goose chase," another argued. "Meanwhile, she gets away." "I'll stay here with 5 men," Sheriff Dawson decided. "The rest of you go with Willard. If he's lying, we'll know soon enough." Mayor Willard nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but you're coming with us, Yates, and if this is a trick, you'll hang alongside her." "Fair enough," Yancy agreed, his composure never wavering. Alyssa watched, her heart in her throat, as the group divided. Yancy, surrounded by armed men, began leading the larger party back toward the hills. Sheriff Dawson and 5 others remained, spreading out to search the property. This was her chance. With the sheriff's attention focused on the cabin, she could slip away as Yancy had instructed. But the thought of leaving, of abandoning her home and possibly leaving Yancy to face the consequences alone, made her hesitate. No, she decided. She wouldn't run. Not when there was a chance to end this madness once and for all. Carefully staying low and using the rocks and sparse vegetation for cover, Alyssa began making her way around the searching men. Not toward town and the doctor's house, but toward the hills, toward the spring, and toward Yancy. The climb was more difficult this time, with Alyssa forced to take a less direct route to avoid being spotted. The sun was beginning to lower in the western sky by the time she neared the spring. Voices carried on the still airmen's voices, some angry, some amazed. She crept closer, staying hidden among the rocks until she could see the scene unfolding by the spring. Yancy stood by the water source, pointing out the underground channel to Mayor Willard and the others. Some of the men were on their knees, examining the flow with expressions of wonder. Others remained suspicious, weapons still at the ready. "It's not enough to just know it's here," Yancy was explaining. "The water needs to be redirected. Those boulders downstream are blocking the original channel. With enough men and the right tools, you could clear it, create a proper flow back to town." "And you expect us to believe this happened naturally?" Mayor Willard asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. "That the timing with Turner's arrival was just coincidence?" "Miss Turner has lived here for years," Yancy corrected. "The drought started long after she settled in Mojave. As for the timing, nature doesn't concern itself with human superstitions. Rocks shift, land changes, water finds new paths. That's all that's happened here." "Then why didn't she tell anyone about this spring?" one of the men demanded. "Because she didn't know," Yancy said simply. "We only found it today, tracking the creek back to its source." Mayor Willard's eyes narrowed. "So she is nearby." Alyssa realized her mistake too late. Before she could retreat deeper into the rocks, one of the men spotted her. "There she is," he shouted, pointing in her direction. In an instant, weapons were raised, pointed at her hiding place. Alyssa froze, terror gripping her. "Hold your fire," Yancy commanded, stepping between the men in her position. "For God's sake, man, she's unarmed." Alyssa took a deep breath, then stood slowly, emerging from her concealment with her hands raised. "I'm here," she called out. "I'm not running and I'm not hiding." Mayor Willard's face flushed with anger. "You were supposed to bring her to town for trial," he accused Yancy. "What trial?" Yancy challenged. "You found your water. The drought isn't her doing. It's nature, plain and simple." "That doesn't explain her garden," one of the men argued. "Why it still grows when everyone else's has died." Alyssa stepped forward cautiously. "My garden is in the shadow of the rocks," she explained. "It gets less direct sun, holds moisture better, and yes, I work hard at it. I haul water every day, water that comes from this same creek, water that's been flowing right past all of you, just underground." A few of the men looked uncomfortable, the certainty of their accusations beginning to waver in the face of the evidence before them. "This changes nothing," Mayor Willard insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "The town has made its decision. You're to leave Mojave, Mrs. Turner, tonight." "The town decided based on fear and superstition," Yancy said, moving to stand beside Alyssa. "Now you have facts. Water that can save your town if you're willing to work together instead of looking for someone to blame." Mr. Peterson stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. "He's right, Willard. We've been so busy blaming Mrs. Turner that we haven't been looking for real solutions." "You're taking her side now, Peterson," Mayor Willard demanded. "I'm taking the side of common sense," the shopkeeper replied firmly. "We need water more than we need a witch hunt." Others began to nod, the mood of the group shifting perceptibly. The discovery of the spring, combined with the obvious flaw in their accusations against Alyssa, was creating cracks in their collective certainty. Mayor Willard sensed his control slipping. "This doesn't change the fact that she's different," he insisted. "That pendant is a Navajo protection symbol," Yancy interrupted. "Nothing more sinister than a cross around a Christian's neck." A long silence followed, broken only by the soft sound of water flowing from the spring. Alyssa could almost see the internal struggle playing out on each face, the need to cling to the simple explanation of a curse versus accepting the more complex reality of natural disaster. "I say we focus on getting this water flowing back to town," Mr. Peterson said finally. "We can sort out the rest later." One by one, the men began to nod in agreement. Even Mayor Willard, seeing the shift in sentiment, reluctantly conceded. "Fine," he said tightly. "Peterson, ride back to town. Get every able-bodied man up here with picks and shovels. We'll clear those boulders by sundown if we have to work through the night." As the shopkeeper departed, the remaining men began examining the area more carefully, the water source now commanding their full attention rather than Alyssa. Yancy moved closer to her, speaking low. "Are you all right?" Alyssa nodded, still hardly believing the sudden change in circumstances. "I thought they were going to shoot me." "I wouldn't have let that happen," he said, and she believed him. "What about Sheriff Dawson?" she asked, glancing back toward her cabin in the distance. "Once they see this, his position won't matter much," Yancy assured her. "Water trumps badges in drought country." As the afternoon wore on, more men arrived from town, bringing tools and ropes. The work of clearing the blockage began in earnest, with Yancy directing the effort based on his assessment of the underground flow. Alyssa found herself accepted back into the group, not with apologies, those would come later, if at all, but with a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. She worked alongside the men, helping where she could, offering her knowledge of the local landscape. By sunset, a channel had been cleared, and water was beginning to flow more freely down the original creek bed. It would take days, perhaps weeks, for the flow to fully recover, but already the difference was visible. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, and the work continued. Alyssa, exhausted from the day's events, sat on a rock slightly removed from the activity. Yancy joined her, offering a canteen of water. "Thank you," she said, taking a long drink. "Not just for this, for everything," he shrugged, the gesture modest but not dismissive. "You'd have found the spring eventually on your own." "Perhaps," Alyssa agreed. "But I might not have lived long enough to do so." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the men work by lantern light. The mood had transformed entirely from the angry mob that had gathered at her cabin hours earlier. Now there was purpose, cooperation, even occasional laughter as the work progressed. "Will they accept me again?" Alyssa asked softly. After all this, Yancy considered the question. Some will, some won't. People don't like admitting they were wrong, especially when they were willing to do something terrible based on that wrong belief. "And what about you?" she asked, gathering her courage to ask the question that had been growing in her mind throughout the day. "Will you stay in Mojave now that the crisis is passing?" His eyes met hers in the dim light, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. "I hadn't planned on it," he said honestly, "but plans change." Before Alyssa could respond, Sheriff Dawson's voice called out from the darkness. "Yates, Turner." They turned to see the sheriff approaching, his expression unreadable in the shadowy light. "Sheriff," Yancy acknowledged, his posture tensing slightly. Dawson stopped before them, looking uncomfortable. "Peterson told me what you found," he said gruffly. "Showed me the water flowing again downstream." "And," Yancy prompted when the sheriff fell silent. "And I was wrong," Dawson admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "We all were. There'll be no trial, Mrs. Turner, no need for you to leave town." Alyssa felt tears prick at her eyes, the simple statement lifting a weight she'd carried for months. "Thank you, Sheriff." Dawson nodded curtly, then turned to Yancy. "The town owes you a debt, Yates. Not many strangers would have stuck their neck out like you did." "Just did what needed doing," Yancy replied. "Well, there's a permanent deputy position open if you're of a mind to stay," the sheriff offered. "Town could use a man with your sense and your draw." Yancy glanced at Alyssa, a question in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I'll consider it," he told Dawson, After the sheriff departed, Alyssa found herself unable to meet Yancy's gaze, suddenly aware of how much she wanted him to accept the offer to stay in Mojave, to stay near her. "A deputy," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "That would be quite a change from wandering." "It would," he agreed. "Though I'm not sure how much law enforcing a place like Mojave needs in peaceful times." "You'd be surprised," Alyssa replied. "There's cattle rustling in the hills sometimes, disputes over property lines. The occasional drunk cowboy on Saturday night." Yancy laughed softly. "Sounds exciting." A comfortable silence fell between them again, broken only by the distant sounds of men working and the gentle flow of the spring. "I have a spare room," Alyssa said suddenly, "at my cabin. If you wanted somewhere to stay while you consider the sheriff's offer." In the dim light, she could see surprise register on Yancy's face, followed by something warmer. "That's mighty kind of you." "It's the least I can do," she said. "After all, you saved my life, my home." "And you found water that might save the whole town," he pointed out. "I'd say that makes us even." Alyssa shook her head. "Not even close." Their eyes met, and Alyssa felt something shift between them, a recognition of possibilities, of futures not previously imagined. "I think I would like to stay," Yancy said quietly. "At least for a while." The work continued through the night and into the following days, men laboring in shifts to clear the blockage completely and reinforce the channel. Water began flowing more strongly down the creek bed, eventually reaching the outskirts of town. Alyssa's status in the community transformed gradually. There were no grand apologies, but small gestures began to accumulate. Mrs. Peterson bringing by a fresh baked pie, Mr. Hoffman offering credit at the general store, invitations to Sunday services at the church. Yancy accepted the deputy position, settling into a small room behind the sheriff's office in town. But he spent most evenings at Alyssa's cabin, helping with repairs, tending to his horse in her small stable, sharing meals and conversation as summer turned to fall. They rarely spoke of the accusations that had nearly cost Alyssa her life, or of the immediate connection that had led Yancy to stand between her and harm. Some things, they both seemed to understand, didn't need words. It was on a cool October evening, with the first hints of winter in the air, that Yancy finally spoke of what had been growing between them. They sat on Alyssa's porch, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "A dangerous pastime," Alyssa teased gently. He smiled, the expression transforming his face as it always did. "Maybe so, but I've been thinking about staying, not just for a while, permanently." Alyssa's heart quickened. "Is that right?" "Mojave's growing again now that the water's flowing," he said. "Sheriff says they'll need a full-time deputy even after he retires next year." "It's a good opportunity," she agreed, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the hope blooming in her chest. Yancy turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "It's not just the job, Alyssa. You must know that by now." She did know. She had seen it in the way he looked at her, felt it in the careful distance he maintained despite their growing closeness, a respect for her past, for her grief, for the healing that needed to happen. "I know," she said softly. "I never expected to find a home here," he admitted. "Never expected to find someone who makes me want to stop wandering." "And have you?" Alyssa asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Found a home?" Yancy reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The touch was warm, solid, like a promise. "I believe I have, if you'll have me." The words hung in the air between them, full of meaning and possibility. Alyssa thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared and the grief that had followed. She would always carry him in her heart, but that heart, she had discovered, was large enough to hold new love as well. "I would," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "I would very much like you to stay, Yancy Yates." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. When they parted, Yancy kept hold of her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm not Thomas," he said quietly. "I won't try to be, I know," Alyssa replied. "I don't want you to be. I want you to be exactly who you are, the man who stood between me and a town's worth of fear when he had no reason to do so." "I had reason enough," Yancy said, his eyes never leaving hers. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were worth fighting for. Winter came to Mojave, milder than usual thanks to the restored water flow. The creek ran strong, feeding the town's wells and allowing life to return to a semblance of normalcy. Spring followed with an explosion of wildflowers across the desert, and with it came a wedding. Alyssa and Yancy married on a perfect April day, with Dr. Morrison officiating and most of the town in attendance. Even Mayor Willard came, offering awkward congratulations that Alyssa accepted with grace. The past couldn't be erased, but it could be learned from, moved beyond. They built a new room onto Alyssa's cabin, expanded the garden, and added to the stable. Yancy continued as deputy, his fair-minded approach to law enforcement earning him respect throughout the region. Alyssa's knowledge of plants and healing, once a source of suspicion, became a valued resource as she worked alongside Dr. Morrison, learning more formal medicine to complement her herbal remedies. And through it all, the turquoise pendant remained around her neck, no longer a symbol of fear, but a reminder of how quickly fear could poison a community, and how powerful truth and courage could be in fighting that poison. 5 years after the drought that nearly cost Alyssa her life, she and Yancy welcomed their first child, a son they named Thomas, not to replace the husband she had lost, but to honor a good man and the love that had prepared her heart for a new beginning. As she stood on the porch of their home, watching Yancy show their 3-year-old son how to gentle a new foal in the paddock, Alyssa reflected on the strange path that had led them here. A drought, a false accusation, a stranger's intervention, a hidden spring, each a link in a chain of events that could have ended in tragedy but instead had forged something beautiful. The pendant at her throat caught the sunlight, the protection symbols seeming to glow with an inner light. It had protected her in its way, though not through any magical properties. It had brought Yancy to her door on that desperate day, and that had made all the difference. Water flowed freely in the creek that ran past their property, a constant reminder that even in the most barren times, hope could be found just beneath the surface if one had the courage to look for it. And as Yancy looked up, catching her eye across the yard with a smile that still made her heart skip, Alyssa knew that some droughts ended not just with rain, but with a flood of blessings she had never dared to imagine. The town of Mojave continued to grow and prosper over the years, the memory of the great drought fading with time but never entirely forgotten. It became something of a cautionary tale, passed down to remind new generations of the dangers of fear and superstition in hard times. Alyssa and Yancy added 2 more children to their family, a daughter, Sarah, born 2 years after Thomas, and another son, Michael, 3 years later. Their home became known throughout the county as a place of welcome and healing, with Alyssa's garden producing not just food but medicinal herbs that she crafted into remedies sought after for miles around. Yancy eventually became sheriff when Dawson retired, bringing a thoughtful approach to justice that emphasized understanding over punishment when possible. His reputation for fairness drew more settlers to the area, confident they would find law and order along with opportunity. On the 10th anniversary of the drought's end, the town held a celebration beside the creek that had saved them. Tables laden with food stretched beneath cottonwood trees that had grown tall and strong with the renewed water supply. Children played in the shallow water, their laughter a testament to how completely life had recovered. Alyssa sat beside Yancy on a blanket spread in the shade, watching their children join the games. Thomas, now 8, already showed his father's sense of justice, intervening when older boys tried to exclude younger ones from their play. Sarah, 6, had inherited Alyssa's affinity for plants, already able to identify most of the desert herbs by sight. Little Michael, just 3, was content to splash at the water's edge under his siblings' watchful eyes. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years, Dr. Morrison remarked, lowering himself carefully onto a chair nearby. The doctor had aged considerably, his once steady hands now trembling slightly, but his mind remained sharp. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Alyssa admitted. "Other times like another lifetime entirely." Yancy's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Another lifetime for all of us." Mayor Willard, still mayor after all these years, though more tempered by experience, approached their group, a glass of lemonade in his hand. "Mrs. Yates," he acknowledged with a nod. Sheriff, Doctor, fine day for a celebration. Indeed it is, Mayor, Yancy agreed easily. There was an awkward pause before Willard spoke again. I've been meaning to say, that is, I should have said years ago. He cleared his throat. What happened during the drought, the accusations it wasn't right, I want you to know I regret my part in it. Alyssa's eyes widened slightly. In all these years, this was the closest the mayor had come to a direct apology. Thank you, Mayor, she said simply. That means a great deal, Willard nodded, relief evident in his expression. Your family has been a blessing to this town, Mrs. Yates. I hope you know that's how folks see you now. After he moved on to greet other families, Yancy squeezed Alyssa's hand. 10 years for that apology. Better late than never, she replied, smiling as she watched Thomas help little Michael construct a dam of pebbles in the creek. Some things take time, Dr. Morrison chuckled. Like recognizing a blessing when it's standing right in front of you. Exactly like that, Yancy agreed, his eyes meeting Alyssa's with the same warmth they had held on that first evening on her porch. As the celebration continued around them, Alyssa reflected on how completely her life had transformed from those dark days of accusation and fear. The woman who had once been blamed for bringing death to the land was now recognized as one who helped bring life and healing. The stranger who had stood between her and hatred had become her partner, her love, the father of her children. That night, after the children were asleep in their beds, Alyssa and Yancy sat on their porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. I've been thinking, Yancy said, echoing the words he had spoken on this same porch a decade earlier. Still a dangerous pastime, Alyssa teased, leaning against his shoulder. He smiled. The children are getting older. Thomas is already asking about going to a proper school in a bigger town. I know, Alyssa sighed. The schoolhouse here is fine for the basics, but he's bright. All our children are. They deserve opportunities. Alyssa straightened, studying his face in the moonlight. What are you suggesting? I've had an offer, Yancy said. From the Territorial Marshal's office in Carson City. They want me to join them, help organize law enforcement across the territory. Carson City, Alyssa repeated. That's a proper city, with schools and a hospital and opportunities for a skilled healer to work with doctors who could further your training, Yancy added. Dr. Morrison mentioned it to me, said it would be a waste of your talent to stay limited to Mojave forever. Alyssa's mind raced with the possibilities. Carson City was over 100 miles away, far from the only home she had known as an adult, far from Thomas's grave on the hillside, far from the creek that had saved them all. It's a big change, she said slowly. It is, Yancy agreed, and we don't have to decide tonight. I just wanted to plant the seed, let you think on it. Alyssa nodded, grateful as always for his patience, his willingness to include her fully in every decision that affected their family. What about you? She asked. You've built something important here. Would you be happy starting over? Yancy considered the question seriously, as she knew he would. I would miss certain things, he admitted. The relationships, the sense of having helped build something good here, but Carson City presents new challenges, new ways to make a difference. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. But none of it matters if you and the children wouldn't be happy there. We can stay here, build on what we have. There's no wrong choice. Alyssa thought of their children, of the limited opportunities Mojave could offer them as they grew older. She thought of her own work, which had expanded beyond simple herbal remedies, but still fell short of the formal medical training she sometimes wished for. But she also thought of this land that had sustained her through the darkest times, of the community that had, eventually, embraced her again. Let's visit, she suggested. Take the children, see Carson City for ourselves before deciding. Yancy's face lit up with a smile. A perfect compromise. We'll go in the spring when the passes are clear. They sealed the agreement with a kiss, as they had sealed so many decisions over their years together. Whatever they chose, Alyssa knew, they would choose it together, supporting each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. Spring came, and with it their journey to Carson City. The children were wide-eyed with excitement at the bustle of the territorial capital, the paved streets, the multi-story buildings. Thomas was immediately drawn to the school, Sarah to the botanical garden maintained by the university, and even little Michael found fascination in the steam-powered printing press at the newspaper office. Alyssa herself discovered unexpected opportunities, a women's medical auxiliary that trained nurses and midwives, a pharmacist who specialized in combining traditional remedies with modern medicines, a hospital that served people from all backgrounds. Yancy met with the territorial marshal, discussing the role he would play in training deputies and establishing consistent practices across Nevada's far-flung communities. They stayed for 2 weeks, exploring every aspect of what life in Carson City might offer. By the time they boarded the stage for the return journey to Mojave, both Alyssa and Yancy knew what their decision would be, though neither had spoken it aloud. It was on their first night back in their own home, with the children asleep after the long journey, that they finally discussed it. It would be a good life there, Alyssa said as they sat on their porch, the familiar desert night surrounding them. Different but good. It would, Yancy agreed. The children would thrive. Alyssa took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. We should go, she said finally. For them and for us too, there's so much more we could both do there. Yancy studied her face in the moonlight. You're certain this has been your home for so long? Home isn't just a place, Alyssa said, the realization crystallizing as she spoke the words. It's the people you love. You taught me that, Yancy. When you came here, a stranger willing to stand between me and harm, you showed me that connection matters more than location. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I fell in love with you that very first day, he admitted. Watching you stand your ground against an entire town's worth of fear, I knew then that wherever you were would be home for me. Then it's decided, Alyssa said. We'll go to Carson City, build a new chapter of our life together. The move took place that autumn, after the harvest was in and the hottest days of summer had passed. They sold the cabin to a young couple just starting out, with Alyssa taking the new wife around the garden, showing her which plants needed which care, passing on the knowledge as her husband had once passed it to her. Thomas's grave presented the most difficult farewell. Alyssa stood before the simple marker on the hillside, Yancy respectfully giving her space for this most personal goodbye. I'm not abandoning you, she told the stone, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. I'll carry you in my heart always. But it's time for us, for me and our son who bears your name, and the family we've built to follow a new path. She placed a bouquet of desert wildflowers on the grave, then unfastened the turquoise pendant from around her neck. For a moment, she held it in her palm, feeling its weight, remembering how it had once been seen as a symbol of evil and was now recognized as part of what made her uniquely herself. Carefully, she buried it at the base of the headstone, a connection that would remain even as she moved on. She had no need of protection symbols anymore. She had found her strength, her purpose, her place in the world. As she descended the hill to where Yancy waited with their loaded wagon, Alyssa felt not sadness but a profound sense of completion. One chapter ending, another beginning. The drought that had nearly destroyed her had, in its way, led to the richest blessings of her life. Carson City welcomed the Yates family with opportunity and challenge in equal measure. Yancy's work with the Territorial Marshal's office took him away from home more often than his sheriff's duties had, but when he returned, it was always to a home filled with love and laughter. Alyssa's skills as a healer found new expression in the hospital and the women's auxiliary, where she eventually became an instructor, teaching younger women the careful balance of traditional wisdom and modern medicine. The children thrived as they had hoped. Thomas eventually attended university in San Francisco, returning to Nevada as a lawyer who specialized in protecting the rights of minors and settlers. Sarah followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming one of the territory's first officially licensed female doctors. Michael, the youngest, surprised them all by developing a talent for writing, his stories of life in the changing West finding eager readers in Eastern publications. And throughout it all, through decades of change and growth, the bond between Alyssa and Yancy remained the cornerstone of their lives. The woman who had been blamed for a drought and the cowboy who had stood between her and those who sought a scapegoat had found in each other not just love but partnership, respect, and a shared vision of what life could be when founded on truth and courage. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a lifetime's worth of friends, Yancy raised a glass in toast to his wife. To Alyssa, he said, his hair now silver but his blue eyes still sharp and clear. Who taught me that sometimes standing your ground is the only way to move forward. And to Yancy, she returned, her own hair streaked with gray but her smile as warm as ever. Who showed me that even in the driest times, if you dig deep enough, you'll find what sustains you. Their glasses clinked, the sound ringing clear like water over stones, a reminder of the spring that had saved a town, and in doing so brought together two souls who might otherwise never have found each other. Some in Mojave still told the story of the drought and the woman who was blamed for it, though the details had softened with time and retelling. In the most common version, Alyssa Turner was not a witch but a wise woman, her pendant not a curse but a blessing that had drawn to her the very man who would help find the water the town so desperately needed. It wasn't the whole truth, but it contained enough of it to serve its purpose, reminding each new generation that fear can blind people to solutions that lie right before them, and that sometimes it takes just one person willing to stand against the tide to change the course of many lives. And in Carson City, in a comfortable home filled with books and mementos of a life well lived, an elderly couple sat on their porch each evening, watching the sun set over the Sierra Nevada mountains, their hands clasped together as they had been through drought and plenty, through hardship and joy, through a lifetime of love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. Some blessings, they both knew, come disguised as disasters. And sometimes, the very thing a community fears most is exactly what it needs to find its salvation.